But that's a different topic. Thank you very much. Let me share screen. And here we go. And I'll put this just so that I can see myself. Okay. Bear with me just 1 second. All the pinning and the this and the that. Great. Okay. Just introduce myself briefly once again. If you haven't been on one of the previous virtual tours that I did through Beit Avi, name's Ami Braun, born in the U.S., made Aliyah as a little kid to Israel. I've been involved in guiding and informal education for the last 20 years, live in Jerusalem, married with a child. And we're here today on this very special date that we're going to get to in a minute to talk about water and Zionism. Why am I saying on this very special date? Today, the date is November the 29th. And if we go back to 73 years ago, November the 29th, 1947, the United Nations is voting for partition to split this land of Israel, not the state of Israel yet, but the land of Israel into two, to be an Arab and a Jewish state. And this, at the end of the day, was one of the most important political or key political variables that will eventually lead to the creation of the state of Israel. It'll take place only a half a year later. So on this particular date, November the 29th, or as we call it, Chag HaChavtet b'November in Hebrew, to be talking about the evolution of water in Israel and how it's about we have today as part of a very important, key and critical Zionist project is very special. And the map that we can see in front of us right now is a map of the water systems in Israel today from Mekorot. Mekorot is the government body that is in charge of the water in Israel today. And this map, in essence, is going to encapsulate the different systems that we're going to be telling their story today. Let's take a quick look, all right? What we can see in this map is as follows. What we're going to be talking about today, first of all, is what's called the Yarkon Negev water system, bringing water from the central area of Israel outside of Tel Aviv to the Negev desert. And that's these blue lines, like it's this blue loop over here that we're going to be talking about later on today. We're also going to be talking about the very famous national water carrier, bringing water from the north of Israel, a lot of rain in the north of Israel, over here from the Kinneret, from the Sea of Galilee, bringing water all the way through to the densely populated area, the Tel Aviv metropolitan area and more, over here and further into the Negev desert, further down south. We're going to be talking about that. We're also going to be talking about the Igudan Center, the Shafdan Center, about reusing wastewater in Israel today and how it's made the Negev desert lifroach, to flourish. And that's going to be the purple pipelines that we can see down below over here, where my blue mouse is right now. And it's coming from right outside of Tel Aviv over here. We're even going to take a visit to the Arava Desert. Very hot. Not a lot of rain over there. And a haven for growing fruit and agriculture, fruits and vegetables. From where? Well, here's the Arava Desert area. Okay, this area over here. And we can see these green lines over here. And we're going to visit it. And along the way, we're going to also be visiting different people, whether it's over there or in other areas of the Negev Desert, to talk about how they get water. So without further ado, I think it's time for us to, and one more thing, of course, and that's what we're talking about so much today also, and that is our desalination plants. 5 huge desalination plants built along the coast, along the Mediterranean Sea. And when we get to that topic towards the end of the tour, I'll try to be a little bit more specific about where they are located. The person with the vision at the beginning is a man whose name is Simcha Blass. He's going to be our waterman who's going to put Israel on the map regarding water all the way back in starting from the 1930s. Simcha Blass is born in Warsaw, Poland. He's going to learn engineering over there. By the 1920s, he's going to immigrate to Israel. Now, at the same time that Simcha Blass is immigrating to Israel, the British mandate is over here, all right? They're going to conquer what's called Palestine, Israel, or the land of Israel. It's not the state of Israel yet, but they're going to conquer the land of Israel in 1917, World War I. They're going to be here for the next 30 years until 1947. And before they even come out with this Palestine Statement of Policy white paper that we'll get to in a minute in 1939, already earlier in the 1920s, different important figures, economic figures within the British Empire are saying, look, we're looking at the land of Israel. We're looking at what back then was officially politically called Palestine, Israel. It's a land that's bereft of water, okay? We're basically looking at a country that has a subtropic climate, all right? There's not enough water for a lot of people. We're now in the early 1920s. There's a few 100,000 people living in the land. We figure that there's enough water for 2 million people to live in the land of Israel, which the land of Israel can be populated with that many people within a generation's time, let's say by the 1940s. And if we now jump forward to 1939, when the British come out with what's called the White Paper, they're going to give a quota in which they're going to say only a small amount of Jews are allowed to immigrate to the land of Israel. And one of their excuses is going to be is that there's not enough water for people, for a large amount of people over here. We cannot allow full-on Jewish immigration to the land of Israel. This is anathemic to the Yishuv. There's a local Jewish residents were called at the time, and the Jewish agency. And this is going to motivate Simcha Blass to say no. We need to find a way within this subtropic climate to be able to have enough water for anybody who wants to move to over here. And Simcha Blass is basically, I'm going to connect with Levi Eshkol, who's later going to be the Prime Minister of the State of Israel in the late 1960s. And they're going to, in the year 1937, create a water company that is called Mekorot. Now, when Mekorot is created, all right, the idea is really to go around the country and find where you can drill down into the ground to get to water and then pump it up for what? For local water use. Don't think of the big government company Mekorot today, which is in charge of providing water for all of the state of Israel. We're talking about water locally at the time. So for example, if we go to Snei Nachum, which is where this picture was taken in 1938, it's in the Beit Avi Valley. We can see this installation over here, which they're drilling down for water. They're bringing the water up to the pump, and then via flood irrigation, they're going to flood the area locally. Years later, we can see Levi Eshkol is going to be put on this 5 shekel bill over here. Here's Levi Eshkol, and in the back of the bill, we can see the water system over here, but that's more the national water carrier, which we're going to get to later on. But Simcha Blass is a visionary, and he has a vision. His vision is not just to stay local, and his vision is not just to drill into the ground and bring water up locally. He has a 3-phased plan. And in general, the area of this, the ideas behind this 3-phase plan that we're going to get to in a minute is for the water not to be local anymore. Okay, Mekorot is not going to just bring water up and use it locally. It's supposed to go national. That's the first idea. The second idea is eventually to bring water from the water-rich north of the land of Israel through the central part of Israel, which also will get a lot of water, but is densely populated, so you need even that much water. And as Ben-Gurion's vision is to settle and make the Negev Desert flourish. What do you need for the Negev Desert to be settled and flourish? Water. I'll also add air conditioning, but that's a different story. You need water. So Simcha Blass, already with this in mind, in 1939 is going to come up with a 3-phase plan that connects us, that affects us and the way water works in Israel until today in the 21st century. First of all, he's going to talk about the need of deep drilling within the Negev Desert in order to get to water. And we're going to get to that in a minute. Next, he's going to talk about bringing water from the springs of the Yarkon River and bring it to the Negev Desert. The third phase is going to be a national water carrier, bringing water from the north to the south through a massive pipeline. The year I'm repeating is 1939. None of this exists yet. All right, there's no even settlements in the Negev Desert quite at that point yet. None of this exists yet, but he has a dream. And his dream is going to come true and that much more. Let's now jump forward to the mid-1940s. These pictures are taken from the Negev Desert. And the Negev Desert, as we can see, in this map over here, you're welcome to follow my blue mouse. This is the area of the Negev Desert that is the western area of the Negev Desert. We can see the border with Egypt today, okay? This is the Mediterranean Sea, and this is the Gaza Strip. I'm just saying this to help and give you geographical markers to understand where we are. Now, 1943, we're going to have the first 7 settlements settled in the Negev Desert in the area over here that's in the map. And after that, in 1946, on Motzei Yom Kippur, right after Yom Kippur, we're going to have what's called the Achatzla Nekudot, the 11 points that are going to be settled in the Negev Desert. Now, you need water. At the beginning, you're relying on trucks that are bringing water down to over there. It's not enough. Simcha Blass, who is this water genius, is going to come, and he's going to dig deep by the kibbutz, the small town called Nir Am, which I'm showing you right over here with my blue mouse. And he's going to hit water. Now, once he hits water, we already said, Simcha Blass has a vision, the water not be locally used anymore, but rather it be more nationally used, it be spread out and used in various areas. Simcha Blass says the water that's going to come from the deep drilling in Nir Am is for all these new settlements in the Negev Desert. Now, what Simcha Blass is going to do is he's going to create a pipe system that's going to connect. And we can see with this blue line over here, all of these towns over here in the Negev Desert. And this is a great story. Now, I remember reading this. It's fascinating. All the little stories is at the end of the day what you remember. Simcha Blass says the following. Okay, the year is 1946, 47 at this point. And he says, we just had World War II. The British have pipelines that they used for the bombings of London. When the Nazis were bombing London during World War II, and there were huge fires all around London, the British need to put out these fires with water, and they use pipelines all over the place to put the fires out. War is over. The pipelines are just hanging around all over the place. Let's buy these pipelines from the British, bring them to over here, and use them, in order to create this pipe system that we can see in the map over here. Now, the pipe system, buying these pipes from the British was very expensive, which is why they were nicknamed the Champagne Pipeline. But they're going to bring them to over here. And these pictures over here are members of the Haganah, with sort of like the pre-Israeli army, if you want to call it that, the Haganah members, and workers from the Mekorot company, putting these pipelines into the ground to provide water for the Negev Desert. We're talking about 1947 at this point. So first of all, what we're going to see over here is basically a short movie about Mekorot talking about how water is now being provided, not just locally, but it's something that's supposed to go regional. And we can see some of these videos over here trying to make the water go regional. And the second video that we're going to see over here is of this Champagne pipeline. And we can see these pipes over here that are being brought from England to Israel, and now they're being put into the ground by members of the Haganah and Mekorot workers. The ironic thing is, when we think about it, is these pipelines originally were used by the British in order to fight the Nazis. And later these same pipelines physically were used by the Jews in order to combat the British in this struggle against Jewish settlement, that they were more against at certain points, and of course the Jews were much more pushing. So we have the Negev Desert that's settled, but for Simcha Blass and in general for the water, it's not, and for these small towns, it's not enough. We need to push to bring more water down to the Negev Desert. We said Simcha Blass is a 3-phase plan, right? So plan A, the point A from the first part of the plan was to drill deep into the Negev Desert. Okay, now that we have the state of Israel and we're on to the next decade, we're into the 1950s, the next phase is to bring water from the Yarkon springs outside of Rosh Hashanah, a dozen miles, even less than a dozen miles, several miles east of Tel Aviv, from the Rosh Hashanah springs, and bring this water from over here through a pipe system that's going to loop around one side and the other side, and it's going to bring water down into the Negev. And this is called the Yarkon Negev pipeline, and it's inaugurated in 1955. We can see the inauguration with Yitzhak Ben-Zvi, the president of the state of Israel at the time. We can see Simcha Blass standing to his right on the left if we're looking at it from the opposite side. And in order to start the celebrations, they had water spritzing over here out of a menorah that was at the inauguration parties. American Jewry actually invested and put in 2/3 of the money that was needed in order to really create this massive project over here that covered about 50,000 acres, meaning about 200,000 dunams. If we take a look at this map over here, what we can see is the Yarkon River. Now, the top of the map over here is to the north, meaning the bottom is to the south, the right is to the east, and the left will be to the west, where we can see this blue over here is the Mediterranean Sea, meaning we have Tel Aviv. But I want to start from the other end, and that's over here. That's this green area over here. This is called the Yarkon Afek National Park, and it's over here that we have the Yarkon Springs outside of Oshain. This is where they're going to start from. It's a beautiful area to walk around. We can see the picture over here down below from the Yarkon Afek National Park. But the river is going to continue flowing, and it's going to make its way westward until it makes its way through the densely populated areas of Petach Tikva, Bnei Brak, and then we have the Yarkon Park in Ramat Gan and in Tel Aviv, which are beautiful areas to walk around, and eventually the water will go out to the sea. Of course, the springs that are used are going to take the water from the river and bring them down to the Negev Desert. And what I want to do is I want to welcome you to a short video that I created in this area of the Yarkon Park in Ramat Gan, just to say hello and try to make it real and bring it more alive. Let me just activate the sounds. Welcome, Tommy, Israel Guide. We're now together on the Yarkon River. And in a country like Israel, which we always talk about being lacking for water, it's always great to be standing next to a river with so much water. But not just that, this red river is cutting smack through the most densely populated area in Israel, the Tel Aviv, Ramat Gan metropolitan area. Beautiful green area and large park, the Yarkon Park, to walk around. But this river over here is also connected to the Yarkon Springs, which is several miles east of here. And it's from the springs over there that the connection of the Negev Yarkon pipeline was created back in the mid-1950s. Love to bring you to here. Now, at the end of the day, though, ultimately, Simcha Blass's dream at the beginning, when he's thinking of all of these ideas, was to create what we know today, the National Water Carrier. Now, by the time it's inaugurated in 1964, he's pushed out politically, but the National Water Carrier is created. Let's first of all take a look at it technically, and then we'll talk a little bit about the meaning of a project like this and a successful project in a young country like the state of Israel in the 1950s when they started working on it, and in 1964 when it was inaugurated. First of all, what is the National Water Carrier? The National Water Carrier, and I'm putting my blue mouse on the map in the middle over here, is a huge pipe system that's going to bring water from the north of Israel, from the Kinneret, from the Sea of Galilee, that is about 200 meters, that's more than 600 feet below sea level, and it'll bring it up. Okay, we can see the pipe system over here. It's going to bring it up to the Galilee, and then it's going to run through the lower Galilee, and eventually we can see the pipe system over here. I'm also running my blue mouse along. It's going to make it to where? To the Yarkon Springs, or the Yarkon Negev pipeline that we spoke about a minute ago, and it'll connect to it. Now, and from there, it'll continue with the water flowing down south to the Negev Desert, and then from there also up to Jerusalem, and even further south, and from what we can see over here in the map, to the middle of the Negev Desert, to Mitzpe Ramon. There's a beautiful picture on the right side over here from what's called the Beit Netofa Valley. It's in the lower Galilee, not far from the Sea of Galilee. And we can see how at the beginning, the National Water Carrier is actually an open aqueduct, and it's going to flow till it gets to a place called the Eshkol Reservoir, which is right over here. I'm showing you with my blue mouse. And then it's going to go underground into massive tunnel system, like we can see in the pictures over here, that when they were working on it in the 50s and the 60s. The work on the National Water Carrier is going to begin in 1956. It's going to last for 8 years until it's inaugurated in 64. Really cool to see. First of all, we can see David Ben-Gurion visiting, Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion visiting the project at a certain point when they're working on it. And if you really want to pay attention, take a look on the right side of our picture. Who's this? A young Shimon Peres, all right? But anyway, what we could also see in these pictures, and I wanted to bring, was this picture in the bottom right corner. And it's a picture of the topography showing the difficult topography that the workers had to work through in order to create the national water carrier. As I mentioned before, it starts at 200, the colors over here, the blue colors and the ups and the downs are showing the topography and the pipe system, how it's going up and down, making its way through the very difficult topography through from the lower Galilee to the coastal plains. We're starting down below in the Kinneret, from 600 feet below sea level. And as we make our way up to the highest point that the system will get, we're 150 meters, meaning about 500 feet above sea level, showing the difficulties that the workers had to overcome. And if we spoke a little bit about the technicalities, what's the meaning? What's going to be the meaning for a young country of mostly immigrants when we put together the biggest project that the state of Israel has ever seen, the national water carrier? This is a public works project. This will provide work for thousands of people, many coming from all different areas around the world, different languages and different backgrounds. It's going to give them a goal. It's going to give them something to unite them, and it's going to be something that's successful, and it's amazing. And this is really going to be the national water carrier is going to be something that till today Israelis are proud of, because it's one of the things that really gave this young state of Israel, not even 20 years old, dealing with, of course, tremendous amount of issues, a lot of. Where can we see the national water carrier today, or at least where it starts from? Well, you need to know what you're looking at. When we're driving north of Tveria, of Tiberias, we're making our way towards the Golan Heights, the Galilee. On the side of the road, as we're driving along the 90 highway, we're going to see a hill. Now, the pipe system, that's what I put over here, is actually inside of this hill over here. We're going to get back to that to a minute. The reason that this the pumping system that takes the water out of the Sea of Galilee was built inside this hill over here was for security and for protection. This is, of course, a very strategic point and place for this young state of Israel. And the Israelis just wanted to make sure it wouldn't be bombed, it'd be hidden from terrorist activity. Now, peeking beyond this hill over here, and again, this hill was, of course, hollowed out. When the workers come to here, they take out the inside of this hill and fill it up with the pumping system that we're going to see in a minute. On the other side, we can see the canal. We can see the Sea of Galilee. Beyond that is the Golan Heights. Now, the water is pumped out of the Sea of Galilee with the pumps that are inside this hill. And if you ever want to go and visit, it's still very secure. You need to call in advance, get permission, give your details, and then you come. It's like in a movie. You know those movies where you like go underground and you go into this room and there's a million computers? It's sort of a similar kind of feeling, because you're going to walk through this long underground tunnel to these huge blue doors, and then they're going to open. And what are you going to see inside? Basically, it's like a pumping station over here. There's 4 massive pumps. 3 will work simultaneously, and they will pump the water out of the Kinneret, out of the Sea of Galilee. Now, what in my opinion is also very important to talk about in this whole story is the story of Eli Cohen. Now, before we get to talk about Eli Cohen the spy, what's going to connect to this is what's peeking beyond this hill over here. And that is the Golan Heights, all right? If the work is going on from 56 to 64, the Golan Heights, this over here is under Syrian hands, all right? The Sea of Galilee is Israeli, the Golan Heights is under Syrian hands, which means that the Syrian hands have a topographical advantage overlooking the Sea of Galilee. And what they can also do is they can block the water that's flowing into the Sea of Galilee, into the Kinneret. Why am I saying that? Let's take a look. Here's our body of water, the Sea of Galilee. By the way, what's also important to mention is the Sea of Galilee, the Kinneret, is a body of fresh water. It's not salty water like the Mediterranean Sea. Fresh water, totally drinkable. That's the whole idea. But anyways, if the pumping station is built over here on the western or even northwestern side, this is Israel, okay? But the Golan Heights, which is all over here, is Syrian. Where does the Kinneret get its water from? It's going to get a lot of its water from the rivers that are flowing through the Golan Heights and into the Kinneret, into the Sea of Galilee, and it'll get its water from the Jordan River that's also north of the Sea of Galilee, not just south as we know it, but also north of the Sea of Galilee. And the northern area of the Jordan River is going to get its waters from a variety of sources. One of them, the Dan River that's on the right side over here. What's this all connected to Eli Cohen? Eli Cohen, famous Israeli spy in Syria from 1962 to 1965. And Eli Cohen gets wind of a grand plan by the Syrians to actually try and block all of the water that's flowing into the Sea of Galilee and basically drive this body of water so that our national water carrier is useless and they want to dry Israel up from water. Eli Cohen is going to, of course, report all this to Israelis. And thanks to Eli Cohen's information and intelligence, Israel knew where to bomb the Syrians as they were trying to build dams and block the water that is flowing into the Sea of Galilee. So Eli Cohen, unfortunately, was caught in 1964 and hung in 65 by the Syrians. And may his memory be blessed. In my opinion, it's very important to remember him in this whole story over here of the national water carrier. But wait a minute. We're not finished yet with Simcha Blass, because Simcha Blass is going to go home in the late 1950s. He's going to sit at home when the national water carrier is inaugurated, but his mind is still thinking. The guy is brilliant. And you know what? Let's go back for a minute to a story. It's going to take place in the late 1930s, when Simcha Blass is walking around a field. And what does he see? He sees how you would water things until then. And that is called by flood irrigation. You're going to flood water into fields, and that's how you're going to grow agriculture. And Simcha Blass, interestingly enough, is going to see that within this flood irrigation, there's going to be a particular pipe where the pipe has a hole, and water is going to be sort of dripping out a little bit. And next to these drips, he sees a huge tree. And he says, how does this make sense? This tree isn't getting water from the flood irrigation. It's getting the water from the drips that are dripping out of the pipe. How can that be? We're talking about 1938. Simcha Blass gets busy with other things. 20 years later, this thought in his mind comes back, and he says, and I quote what he is going to say 20 years later, he's going to say, I became busy with other plants, but the drop of water that grew a gigantic tree refused to leave me. It stayed trapped and sleeping in my heart. And this is going to eventually lead to what's called the drip system. Simcha Blass is going to create a system where basically, instead of flooding fields like we can see on the right side over here, or using a tremendous amount of water, basically, what's the word that I'm looking for? To spray the fields over here. The word escapes me right now. It'll come back to me in a minute. He's going to talk about, don't waste so much water. Let's use the drip system. And what he's going to do with this drip system, where you're going to create a pipe system which has little holes inside of it. You'll simply have water dripping out and giving the necessary water needed for whatever plants you're growing. And you're not only going to save a tremendous amount of water, it's so much more efficient, because when you're using a sprinkler system, that's the word that escaped me before. When you're using sprinkler systems to water fields or flood irrigation, you're going to lose between 50 to 60% of the water that you're using in the fields due to either evaporation or water that's uselessly going into the ground, but not doing its job. With the drip system, you're going to have only 4% water loss regarding the water that's actually being used. And that's in addition to, of course, the fact that originally you're saving a tremendous amount of water. Simcha Blass comes up with this idea, and he's going to turn to Hebrew University and to a few different sources, and he's going to talk to them about it. He wants to sell it to them, sell them the idea, and everyone says to him, Simcha Blass, go home. We don't want to listen to you. But like any great innovator, Simcha Blass is not going to give up. And eventually, he's going to turn to the Ministry of Agriculture. And when he turns to the Ministry of Agriculture, they're going to say, let's give it a shot. They're going to go out to the field, and they're going to plant a grove of almond trees. Now, the little eye with the drip coming out of it, they're going to put below ground. And above it, they're going to plant the trees. They're going to run the drip system, and the trees start dying. And everybody's about to scrap the idea until at the last minute, a man whose name is Yehuda Zohar totally saves the day. He says, listen, don't put it underneath the ground because the roots of the tree are blocking the water from coming out. Put it above the ground so that the roots will get the drops appropriately. And voila, it worked. And what will happen is Kibbutz Chatzerim is going to eventually, they're going to, after this, buy the drip system from Simcha Blass. And this creates a company that's called Mitafim, from the word lenatef, to drop. And there's going to be 2 other kibbutzim that are going to join Kibbutz Chatzerim with this company called Netafim in the drip system, Kibbutz Magal and Kibbutz Iftach in the north of Israel. It's going to completely take off. It's going to change the world regarding agriculture, with the drip system today being sold all around the world, originating today. I mean, there's companies all around the world, but it is a multi-billion-dollar endeavor today, with many companies all around the world originating from Israel and Simcha Blass. So we've spoken about the 3-phase plan of Simcha Blass, and it's time to move on now to some of the other ways that Israel is able to, in this country, with a growing population, tenfold times and more from the time of the British, when they said that this country could not have more than 2 million people. How is a country with several million people today and more going to be able to deal where in a place where you have winters which are rainy, winters with droughts, not always being able to rely on the amount of water that's going to come from the heavens, not always being able to rely on the amount of water that's in the Kinneret, in the Sea of Galilee, that's coming through the national water carrier, because we're reliant on rainwater that will fill up the Kinneret and the Sea of Galilee. In the late 1980s, the Shafdan Center, also known as the Igudan Center, is built. And we can see a picture of it over here from above. It's built in the city of Rishon LeZion, which is right south of Tel Aviv. And the idea is like this. All the water that you're going to run in your sink, in your shower, you're going to wash your floor with, it's sewage water that you're going to flush your toilet with, is all going to be condensed and connected in a pipe system underneath the densely populated Tel Aviv metropolitan area. We're talking today about a mega area with 2.5 million people living over there today. And the water is going to be brought to the center called the Shafdan Center, south of Tel Aviv, in Rishon LeZion. And over there, this water is going to be cleaned. It's called reusing wastewater. And we're going to start reusing it for different things. Now, the thought process when this is created is like this. They basically say, look, why don't we take this wastewater and reuse it for agricultural purposes? But how do we know that it's going to be clean enough to reuse it for agricultural purposes? So they're going to go out on a limb, and in an area by the center over here, not far from the coast, it's a sandy area next to Rishon LeZion. There's an area where you have earth, sand, but when you go 100 meters down below it or 300 feet below it, below the sand over here, you're going to get to an aquifer. So the idea is to take this wastewater, it's to simply sit it in the sand over here, and over a period of the next 6 to 12 months, this water is going to permeate through the sand and eventually get to the aquifer that's underneath. Now, it's a bit of a risk at the beginning when they're doing this because they weren't sure it was going to work. There was a fear that this sewage water, that this wastewater would actually contaminate the water in the natural aquifer that's underneath over here and would ruin it. But in essence, what happened at the end of the day is that the sand over here, these 100 meters to 300 feet of sand purify this water so that by the time it reaches aquifer over here, it was good to go to be used for agriculture. I mean, what we can see over here is a view from above of the Shafdan or the Igudan Center. We can see, if you go for a visit inside the visitor center over here, how they're cleaning the water. I can tell you I was there. It was one of the smelliest, stinkiest visits I had in my life, but for obvious reasons, of course, but one of the most fascinating. It was really fascinating how they bring this water to there, and of course it'll smell, but it's clean and it'll be reused, and it's going to be reused for what and where. So the water, bear with me one second. is going to come. What we're looking at right now is a picture of Israel, but in the opposite direction of maybe what you're used to. We usually look at Israel when the top of the map is the north. Here, the top of the map is the south, and the bottom over here is the north. Why did I do that? Because let's take a look. Here's Herzliya. And I told you right outside of Herzliya, we have the Shavdan Center where they clean all this wastewater. This is where the water will also enter a pipe system that's 100 kilometers, about 60 miles long, and it's going to head to the Negev Desert. This same area that a few dozen years before Simcha Blass put in the Champagne pipeline, the same area we have the Erko Negev water going to. But now this water is going to come through this pipe system to here, not for drinking. We're not going to drink wastewater, but we're going to use it for industry and for agriculture. Just to try and, again, put this into perspective of this area that I'm showing with my blue mouse. Take a look. This line with my blue mouse that I'm making right now is the border between Israel, it's over here, and Egypt, it's over here, it's all deserty. In addition to that, this is the Gaza Strip. Not talking politics, just giving this as markers over here to sort of show where we're at. We want to go to the fields over here that the water is going to. I put 2 markers over here, Road 241 in the salad trail, because that's what we're going to visit now. And John, this whole area is filled up with agricultural fields, thanks to the reusing wastewater that's going to come to over there. And what we just did right now is we jumped forward, and now we're standing right above these areas of the Negev Desert, the northwestern area of the Negev Desert, and a picture is worth 1,000 words. Look at these fields. A lot of this planted over the last 10, 15 years, thanks to the fact that Israel reuses its wastewater. The agriculture in the western Negev Desert, 70% of it gets its water from the wastewater that comes from the Shavdan Center. As a whole, Israel reuses 85% of its wastewater. Just to put that a little bit into perspective internationally, the country that's number 2 in the world in reusing wastewater is Spain. They reuse 25% of their wastewater, which is pretty amazing. And if beforehand, we were looking at this particular highway over here, the 241 highway, I just chose it. I could have chosen any other spot, but I just chose it a little bit even randomly. Let's pop down into the highway. And when you go driving down there today, it's all orchards. It's fields with citrus fruit everywhere. And it's beautiful and amazing to see. Now, a lot of these orchards with these citrus fruit that were planted over the last 10, 15 years, not only is going to give food and fruits and vegetables, of course, but it's also going to affect the temperature because it's a shadier area. And on average, that will bring the average temperature down every year by about 1/4 degree Celsius. So it's amazing the effects that we have over here. Now, in addition to that, we're also trying to make this a virtual tour. So what I'd like to do is I want to visit somebody. He's a dear friend and a colleague. And what we're going to do in a minute is we are going to go visit Uri Alon in the Salad Trail. We can see it's right over here down below in the Western Negev Desert. And we're going to see when we go visit Uri Alon and this wonderful place that he's created called the Salad Trail, which is a great place for people to go and visit and experience families, groups. It shows, we're going to see a combination of 2 things. One, how in the Salad Trail, in the sand dunes, Uri uses the wastewater that we've been talking about to grow the wonderful fruits and vegetables that he uses over there. And Uri's going to also point out the drip system that he also uses. So, without further ado, here we go.
Now I want to speak about oranges in the desert. We can grow oranges and lemon even if in the desert. And we can see the honeybee at working now, do pollination, look for nectar from the flower. We can grow in the desert because we have special water. It's called Shafdan water. We take the sewage water of Tel Aviv and clean them. Instead to throw the water to the sea. We clean the water with bacteria, with net. We take the water, let them go to the underground next to Tel Aviv, stay in deep of 150 meter 1 year. Then we pump the water outside, and the water became to be very clean. All the dirt stay next to Tel Aviv, and we bring water clean as a drinking water to the desert. And we use them to irrigate our plant. You can see here the drip irrigation system, like we speak about it in the tomato, and the plant growing very well in the desert. And even Spider-Man visit us. It's net of a special spider called brown mamba.
So thank you very much to Uri. And we're going to continue in the desert now, but we're going to leave the Western Negev desert area that we were in before, more or less over here. And we're going to pop over to an area that's even that much drier. I mean, almost no rain. Very minimal amount of rain a year, between 25 to 30 millimeters on average a year. And I'm now pointing out to this red area that I created called the Arava Desert. You know that long drive if you've driven down to Eilat, when you're coming through the valley south of the Dead Sea, and it's a long, boring drive until you get to Eilat over here. So that's the Arava Desert, and let's make it interesting. Let's not have it boring. Let's make it interesting. How are we going to make it interesting? By bringing it to life with water. Underneath the ground of the Arava Desert, we have aquifers that are called fossil aquifers, meaning there's water underneath there from millions of years ago. And this water is anywhere between 150 to 1,500 meters deep. Time those numbers by 3, and you have them in feet. Now, if they're even 1,500 meters deep, the water down below there is going to be very hot, 60 degrees Celsius. That's, I would give it maybe, what is that, about 140 Fahrenheit, rough estimate. And the water is brackish, it's salty. You need to bring the water up, desalinate it, cool it off, and then use it for agriculture. And that's what's done by many of the towns. Are there when you next time you drive through the Arava Valley over here to or from Eilat, look at the fields on the way. This is where they get their water from. Now, I recorded myself because it's just easier that way with Google Earth. And what I want to do is come with me, and let's go down into the Arava Valley over here, and we're going to see some of these towns via Google Earth, and the green areas around it that are the fields. And even if my voice and the mouse, which is white, in the video isn't totally synchronized, I think you're going to get the idea. Hey, so what I want to do now is I would like us together to go through the Arava Desert, which is this area over here, and see the astonishing agricultural growth. Again, it's the southern area of Israel. Here's the triangle, that's the Negev Desert. And what we're going to do now, though, is we're going to drive along the 90 highway south of the Dead Sea, all the way down to Eilat, to the Red Sea. And how are we going to do that? Let's make our way into Chatzeva. And now we're going to see how next to every little town, we're going to see these green fields that are growing. So here's Chatzeva. We can see the fields over here. Okay. And now we're going to drive along the 90 highway. And we're coming upon Ein Yahav with all of their agricultural growth. Let's continue along the 90 highway. Sofar. Okay. All this in the middle of the desert, more agriculture. We're going to make our way through what usually is a very boring drive, but it's cool when we look at it like this. Paran, we're going to soon enough go visit Aviram Morris in Paran and see his date tree farms over there. And we're continuing south still on the 90. It's a long drive through the desert. But again, agriculture pops up, the agriculture of Yahel. There we go. And now we see Lotan and Torah, their fields over here in the middle of the desert. and we're getting close to Eilat. These are already the fields that are close to Eilat by Eliphaz and the agriculture growing over there. We get the idea. What I'd like to do is let's go to Paran that we saw before, to the wonderful date fields of Aviram Morris. He gets his water from the source that we spoke about. And also please pay attention to the water that's sort of around the palm trees themselves that we're going to see that comes from the drip system. If you were wondering regarding, okay, so they get the water from deep below the ground over here. How does it affect the fruits and vegetables? The answer is, well, some of them might be a little bit smaller than usual, but definitely tastier. That's what people say. And we're talking about melons and peppers, tomatoes, eggplants, date trees that we saw before, and more. Let's jump forward a little bit more. And as we're coming towards the end of our tour over here regarding water, of course, we have what everybody's talking about, and that is desalination plants in Israel. The problem is, and I mentioned this before, is that in Israel, for many years, we were, still are to a degree, but much less now, a lot of things of desalination plants, dependent on rainwater, always following how high or low the Kinneret is, depending on the rainwater, drought years, and the fear of that and affecting, our usage of water in agriculture and whatnot. And making it difficult to plan ahead multiple years regarding, water usage. So starting from 2005, over the next several years, 5 massive desalination plants were built in Israel. Let's first of all take a look at where they're located and then talk about who is the brainchild behind these plants and how does it work. We're talking about the 5 are along the coast, and I'm sorry in the map that we can't see them better. This is the best, it was the best I could do in this situation. We have in the south of Israel, Ashdod and Ashkelon. Further up, we're going to have Palmachim and Sorek. Just to put things into perspective, this is Tel Aviv. No desalination plant there, but just saying that to give you a bit of a pointer to the area. And then in the north, we have the Hadera power plant, which is over here. These are 5 massive power plants. Now, if we also just take a look at them, we can see Sorek power plant, Ashdod, Ashkelon, Hadera, and Palmachim. The brainchild behind the idea of desalinating water and the method that we do it in was a man whose name was Sidney Loeb. Sidney Loeb, American Jew, born in Kansas, comes to work on a particular project in Israel in 1966. No plan of staying here. Meets a wonderful young lady, as many stories go, a Jewish immigrant from England. Her name is Mickey. And they're going to fall in love in the 60s, where it happens 1967, inspires Sidney Loeb to stay in Israel, and he'll make Aliyah, and he's going to come up with this idea in which he says, if you take membranes with nano-sized holes and have the water go through it, it'll stop the salt and other particles from going through, just so the water will continue, and salt and other particles will go back out to the Mediterranean Sea. This is called the reverse osmosis process. And this idea that Sidney Loeb came up with is eventually what we're going to use today in Israel's desalination plants with the reverse osmosis technology. Look, if we go back to the beginning, when we were talking about Simcha Blass and his idea of how to take water from being something local to turning it to regional, the projects that he created, or that it was his idea in order to do it, all the way through to the later on technologies that we have today, what we see over here is us at the beginning, thinking out of the box, of course, but taking from nature with thanks to the ability that we have now with desalination plants and reusing wastewater, we're also able to give back to nature. If over many years rivers were dried out because we were using the water for the Erko Negev pipeline, for the natural water carrier, today, because we're less reliant on these water sources due to the wastewater that we reuse and due to the desalination plants, we're able to also give back to nature. We're much less dependent. Droughts are obviously never a good thing, and we're always trying to save water. But us making it a national sport and checking and seeing how high or low the kinneret is, because our almost life depends on it, because we need that water in order to continue on our daily life, we're not as dependent anymore. Of course, we want the kinneret to be full, of course, for many reasons, but it's not something that we're hinging, our planning regarding water usage in agriculture or whatnot anymore. Today, we can be much freer in that respect, and agricultural workers can plan years ahead, less worrying about the amount of water that they're going to be getting. In addition to that, it also impacts population centers. It's easier today to move out. For example, the Negev Desert, okay? You can go out to there today and create and plant agricultural fields much more easily due to the water that you can get, you have much more access to today, as opposed to in the past. And what we saw over here today is a paradigm shift, and we can connect it, if you're in my previous tour a week ago regarding water in ancient times in Israel, regarding technology with water. A week ago, we spoke about how in the past, in water at the beginning, you needed to build your town exactly where the spring was. With Roman technology, you didn't need to anymore. You had aqueducts that brought the water from point A to point B. 20th and 21st century, in the past, we had to live closer to where the water was until we were able to bring water, make it something regional and not just local, and bring it to wherever we needed in the country. And water in Israel is a very central part of daily life and our culture over here. Very famous poet and singer Naomi Shemer is going to write about going to the water holes. Israelis love to go to the water holes, to the Ma'ayan, to the spring, to sit there with the coffee, with the finjan, and making a nice coffee over there, and sitting and chilling with the guitar and a little music. You're going to jump into the water, you're going to go in, and you're going to wash yourself off. So her poem, to the water holes, to the water holes, to the spring, palpitating in the mountain. Or we can go to, on the right, the famous Israeli nursery rhyme that shows how much we want the rain. Geshem, Geshem, Mishamayim, Kol Hamon Tipot Hamayim. Rain, rain from the sky, drops of water all day long. Drip, drip, drop, clap your hands together. Not rain, rain, go away, but clap your hands together because we want this rain. People love springs. People love hiking in the water over here. So first of all, we can see a picture on the left with Ein Lavan, a wonderful spring in Jerusalem, having a good time. And the picture on the right from Wadi Kelt, just going out to the waters of whatever with some friends and having a good time.
Let me come and check. Wow, just look at that. You can even see all the freshwater snails. That's a good sign.
Oh, it's just something else.
Let's see what it looks like from below.
So before we finish, I just want to say two things before I open it up to questions. First of all, is this wonderful book, a little hard to see with the background, so I'll mention it. It's called, there we go, Let There Be Water by Seth Siegel. Wonderful book, in my opinion, the best book to read about the evolution of water technology in Israel over the last 100 years. And the second thing that I'll say is I started by mentioning November 29th, 1947, the partition plan, and the UN voting to create the state of, we'll call it the state of Israel over here. I wish I could go back then, and from then take a look forward over the next 70 years and see how we've evolved with water. And it'd be pretty cool from then be able to look forward and see who would believe. You tell someone today back in 1947 how this evolved, I think they'd be pretty amazed. I'll open up for questions. If you have questions, comments, remarks, of course, you're more than welcome to email me, amibron@gmail.com. We're going to stop share. And you know what? Oh, yes, Tamar, yeah.
No, it's great. I think we all need a nice drink of water after this, Ami. Okay, so Michael wants to know, when wastewater is used for edible crops, how does Israel monitor medication that are used in wastewater? Or was wastewater used originally only for inedible crops?
No, the wastewater, look, I'll answer that question, then I'll answer a question from last week. The water is monitored in the Shavdan Center. I don't know to tell you exactly what terms they use in the Shavdan Center, or as it's called today, the Igudan Center, to monitor it. But over there, they monitor the water. They're able to see, once it goes through all of the sand that I spoke about before and it gets to the aquifer underneath, that it's clean. What elements do they use? What technology do they use to see that it's clean? Is a good question. I don't know how to answer that specifically, but it's checked and the water is absolutely clean to be used for food. And I'll add on to that. What I've also read is that it's even clean enough to drink. We don't do that because of the psychological effect, but the Shavdan Center is constantly monitoring it. I apologize, I don't know to answer exactly how they do it. Another question, Tamar, that was asked last week was regarding flash flood water and why doesn't Israel use it? Israel does use it. Israel, in various areas around the country, will trap flash flood water in the Golan Heights, in the Negev Desert, and in the Arava. They'll trap it, and in certain areas, such as in the Nachal Shikma or in the Menashe region, not far from Zichron Yaakov and Caesarea, they actually cremate that water back into the ground, into aquifers. There's what's called limanim. A liman is around JNF basically planted trees in the Negev Desert not far from Beersheba and created small walls. It's called the liman all around from earth and dirt, and it'll trap flash floods, and then the water will help with the trees over there. So not all the flash flood water is trapped, but a certain amount is.
Okay. Linda wants to know, how does Eilat get water?
How does what?
Eilat, how does water get? In Eilat, what water do they do?
Eilat. If I read it correctly, Eilat. You were a little choppy. Yeah. There's a desalination plant over there. They desalinate water from the Red Sea.
Okay. Ellie wants to know if anything is done with wastewater from Jerusalem.
Okay, Eddie, shoot me an email. I will look into it and give you an answer, because it's, yeah. You wanted to say, Tamar?
No, besides that, Alan also wanted to know if they could get from you maps, and if people email you, will you send them the maps and pictures you showed?
Email me. Some I can. Tell me exactly what you want. Be in touch with me. We'll talk details. We'll see exactly what you want. Some I'm happy to give. I'm not going to give my whole PowerPoint presentation, of course, but the map of the water system from the Mekorot company, with pleasure. And if you want any other particular pictures, shoot me an email and we'll see what the picture is, and we'll go from there. You started with a different question before I forgot.
Another. What percentage of water is provided by the desalination plants?
So, because I knew that question was going to come up, I just wrote down all the numbers because you go remember everything. So, okay. In Israel, we annually use about 2 billion cubic meters of water a year. 1 cubic meter equals 1,000 liters. All right. So anyway, so that's the annual usage, 2 billion cubic meters of water a year. From desalination water, we have about 660 million cubic meters of water a year, meaning about 30% of our annual usage of water comes from desalination plants.
Wow, happy to hear that. Yeah. Okay, we're going to take the last two questions together, and I'm sorry that we can't answer all the questions. Janet and Lori both ask about water in Jerusalem. Where did it come from? Is it Kinneret or desalinated?
At the end of the day, the water is it changes, and it changes when, where, what, and how. If we follow the line of the national water carrier, which honestly, very, very little water is used today from the Kinneret anymore. We're talking about 30 million cubic meters of water out of 2 billion annually a year. Because we have our other sources today, almost nothing today comes from the Kinneret. In the past, yeah. And from the Kinneret through the national water carrier down to the springs, the Yarkon springs, and then from there, via a pipe system, there are a few pipe systems that make their way up from the Yarkon springs up to Jerusalem. Remember when we spoke about the Yarkon Negev spring, how it brings water down to the Negev? There's also a branch off from the same source, bringing water up to Jerusalem. And that's at the end of the day where it gets its water from. Now, regarding the desalination plants, everywhere gets water from the desalination plants today. Mekorot, which is the government company that's in charge of all the water in Israel, they balance it because we have a lot of sources, be it from the desalination plants, from the Yarkon springs, from drilling. So much of Israel's water also comes from local drilling in so many different areas. They'll balance it. What, where, what comes from, how, when, and you get the idea.
Thank you very much, Ami. I think we all learned a lot of new things and interesting and flowing information. We hope to see you all with us next Sunday to continue our next tour towards Hanukkah. Thank you very much, Ami. Thank you, everybody. Good evening and goodbye.
Good night. Thank you.